is to build those pipelines. So if you can break Chinese relations with Iran, they lose 10 or 12% of their oil now, 70, 80 billion of development contracts, plus hundreds of billions of future oil that they've contracted for, right? That could all be lost. And what Mrs. Clinton was doing in Saudi Arabia, she went there to get the Saudis to say, don't worry, Iran, we will give you the oil that you would have gotten from Iran if we put the sanctions on Iran. But it's basically a fraud. Because
okay, well, listen, we understand the larger picture, and this is really excellent, Webster, you do it as no one else can. How do they precipitate, how do they get the American people to go along with this attack on Iran? And militarily, we know Cheney, they wanted a 2-month sortie, thousands of flights, bombing the entire infrastructure, power plants, water treatment, factories, military bases, naval fleets. How do they get us to war, and what will the war look like?
Well, you know, during the course of 2009, one of the things we've seen is the return of false flag operations, right? We had Major Hassan at Fort Hood in November, and then we had the Christmas Patsy in December. And
every time intelligence knows all about it and protects them.
Right, and even before that, during the summer, we had Zazi between Flushing, New York, and Colorado. Big hysteria around that.
We had the black guy dressed up with a fake beard and turban with grenade launchers in New Jersey 3 weeks ago.
Right, we had the Scarsdale. I'm sorry, the Westchester Patsies who were going to attack a synagogue in Riverdale, and also an air base a little bit north of New York City. So that has been building up. There's a big increase during 2009 compared to 2008.
All right, stay there then. We're going to answer those two key questions straight ahead with Webster Tarpley. I'm Alex Jones. We're going to answer, how do they launch the false flag? What will the attack on Iran look like? What will the aftermath be? Okay, Webster, you got cut off by the break, so I'm going to reintroduce the questions. How will they launch the war with Iran? We've got some of their public planning on how they're going to hit Iran. Who will be involved in that, and what are the possible outcomes of it?
Well, I think given the weakness of the U.S. and the general method of the people who are now in power, probably not starting with a direct U.S. attack on Iran, but through some proxy. And there, of course, Israel always comes into question. Whether the Israelis are simply going to let themselves be used for that, I do not know. But that's obviously the very grave danger.
So you think the U.S. is the body and Israel's the tail? You don't think Israel's wagging the U.S.?
No, I think that's a misconception. It's London and New York, and then they have client states, and Israel is one of them. But in this case, there's a constituency in Israel to do this kind of stuff. But I think there's also an opposition. Let's keep that one as probably the leading example, right? So then the U.S. could say, why, this is a breakaway ally. We didn't do this, but now don't you dare retaliate, because that would destabilize.
And they've said that's the policy. They've said, Israel, don't attack, but we won't stop you if you do, and we're going to support you. And if anybody raises a hand to even block your attacks, that will be called terrorism.
Well, the thing that there's been, the Israelis in the past 2 years have been told no, 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 no. And now I wonder if that is changing behind the scenes. That's a big obvious question. Otherwise, you have all of these Gulf of Tonkin false flag events of all different types. I mean, the entire panoply that we've discussed over the years comes into play. Let's talk about how you mobilize to stop this, though, because I think this is really essential. The first thing is this Christmas Patsy story, right? The Umar Farouk Abdul Muttalib. This has fallen apart faster and more than any other similar case in recent years, because we now have the testimony not of just anybody, but the Undersecretary of State, Patrick Kennedy, Undersecretary of State for Management, that means consular services and visas, saying we wanted to take his visa away, but there's this other federal agency that overrode it and said, no, we have a national security reason for you to keep the visa in his hands because we're following him. We want to know what federal agency. We want to know who, people, names, posts.
Well, they said intelligence agency, so it's probably the CIA.
Well, it could be law enforcement, too. CIA, obviously the leading candidate, but it could be DIA. It could be somebody inside the State Department itself. You don't know.
Stay there. Back in 70 seconds with the final hour. Webster, we will continue. Here's the French news agency headline: Israel mulling a spring or summer war, Ahmadinejad. But in response, AP, Netanyahu, Israel not planning war with Iran. But they continue to put out both stories. Webster Tarpley says it's now on the front burner, and it's being green-lighted. Notice we hear the media saying it's been red-lighted, and that Admiral Mullen and the head of the Joint Chiefs have said no. Webster, you were getting into false flag terror as the pretext, but how fast it's been exposed, because the majority of the population knows about false flag and knows what to watch for. So continuing with how they get the war with Iran, what happens in the war with Iran, how they hit Iran, how Israel hits them, and then what comes out of that. Go ahead.
Again, the thing that we have to mobilize on is we now have this testimony from the Undersecretary of State of the United States saying we wanted to take the visa away, and somebody came forward inside the federal intelligence community, either law enforcement or intelligence, and said, no, he keeps his visa, he gets on the plane. In effect, we want the incident. Now, that's a string to pull. You pull on that thread, it leads you to the invisible government. It leads you to this honest-to-God rogue network, which is an empirical reality. It's not just some legend or myth or shadowy presence. Here it is. They're caught in the act, right? They're, red-handed. So this is the time to pull on that. Now, in that House Homeland Security Committee, one of the people leading the questioning, I think, is your congressman, Alex. McCall, is that his name?
Yes.
Yeah, he's there, right there in Austin. Now, he was interested in this. You had Benny Thompson of Mississippi, right, a black Democrat. You had a whole bunch of these people struggling, or pretending to struggle, I don't know, to figure out what this is. The members of the Homeland Security Committee, you can look this up on their website. Those are the people you want to talk to about this, right? Plus, obviously, other people like, Leahy of Vermont, right, the Senate Judiciary Committee. This is a big story, and you can see how afraid the New York Times, the Washington Post, and the TV networks are, because they don't cover this. This is essentially a phantom story, which it's out on the internet and different websites, but none of the mainstream media have it because they're really afraid of this, because this is authoritative, conclusive testimony that this whole thing was a fraud, that it was staged. Now, the other side of it, I would say, let me appeal to people who are friendly to Obama. I'm sure there are some listening in, right? Or even, you don't even have to be friendly to Obama. You just have to be, interested in the presidency or avoiding this outcome that we've been talking about. Obama needed to fire the head of the Secret Service. In other words, when you have three groups of people led into the White House, he's got to fire the head of the Secret Service. The name is escaping me right now, but it's easy to find out. And this woman, Desiree Rogers, right, the social secretary in the White House. I mean, her public pose is that she's a celebrity, right, that she wants to be a famous person, and therefore she milks her job for that. But there may be something more sinister with her. So it would be good practice to fire her, because she's the one who keeps the list, makes the list of who gets invited to these White House events. And the head of the Secret Service, by all means, should be fired. Generally speaking, Obama needed to fire people on January 4th, January 5th. When he came out with that stuff that Richard Wolff put on MSNBC, that the White House was considering that this Christmas incident was a staged, intentional incident with the alternative agenda. The only answer to that is heads must roll. You've got to start firing people, whether or not you know if they're incompetent or if they're in the rogue network. But if you find people who are party to this kind of a lapse, you have to fire them. So Napolitano needed to be fired. Probably Panetta needed to be fired. Dennis Blair, the intelligence czar, certainly needed to be fired.
Okay, Webster, final segment with you straight ahead. Separately, you have Jay Rockefeller saying Obama's not believable. You've got all these people throwing him under the bus. They've ridden this horse as far as they can, unless they stage some attack on him. And I, again, see them preparing this. You agree it's a serious danger. I just think we really need to get out ahead of this, because an attempted assassination will buoy him. We'll talk about it.